Hey lovelies, Lisa here, and it's day 24, it's June 24th, nearing the end of my Tower month. Um, and today I want to work with the Japaritse Tarot, tarot deck that is, as some of you know, I, you know, I really admired. It was mass produced. I thought I could pick it up any time, and then it became, out of print and suddenly was impossible to find. Or to find at a price I was willing to pay. But I picked up a copy of it, and now I own it, and it's gorgeous. And I've only just begun to hold it, work with it, come to understand it. Yeah, it's a really interesting deck. It's a beautiful deck. It is not a perfect deck, or it's not my perfect deck, but it's powerful. So I wanted to read first from Steve Lucas's little guidebook for the deck. Steve Lucas is the owner of the Surrealism Gallery in New York City that featured Nina Japaritse's artwork that made up this tarot deck. And their, I think, collaboration in producing this deck is would be really interesting to know more about. One of the things I love most about the Japaritse Tarot is it is the product of an artist, first and foremost, with such a unique voice and style. Anyway, so here's what Steve Lucas writes about the tower. He says, in the midst of a field charged with lightning's hallucinatory and chaotic energy, a figure falls from a tower high on a hilltop. The tower is without question the single most transformational card in the entire tarot deck and can be seen as the Big Bang moment in which one is violently jolted from the last vestiges of ego-driven consciousness to the first stages of a higher spiritual existence depicted in the remaining major arcana cards. So this is the card, and it is just nothing but energy. Nothing but energy, this swirl of energy. It's chaotic, it's violent. I love the idea of connecting this card with the Big Bang, with that that explosion, that ignition that produces universes. And I think this card is just gorgeous. Just gorgeous. And the way in which the individual figures meld into the flames. One of the things about fire is that it's both singular and multiple. It sort of acts as one thing, but has, these many different tongues. And this conflagration with the way bodies and flame and light and building and sky are all blended together. And then these touches of blue, which especially at the bottom evoke the kind of water that mingles with the fire, and the sort of heaven meets the earth kind of imagery of this card. It's all coming together, right? It's all energy and combustion and movement and forward thrust. It's incredible. And yet the part of Steve Lucas's description that I have some concern with is this idea that somehow the tower in its transformation is about blasting out of how does he put it, the ego-driven, the last vestiges of ego-driven consciousness. We're jolted from those. We're jolted from the last vestiges of ego-driven consciousness. And what I guess I want to say is that the ego isn't something that we ever get rid of. If we could simply get rid of the self, right? If we could simply get rid of the self, life wouldn't involve as much suffering or as much joy as it does. To challenge, to expand, to transform the self as limited, that may be, our great task in this human life. But to imagine that somehow we move from ego to cosmos, I think that just negates what's so important about being like incarnated in these fleshy packages. You know, it's like it's just the height, that thinking is just the height of what to me is a kind of dualist delusion, that somehow there's the truth, which is beyond the self, beyond the ego, beyond the material, beyond the fleshly. And then there's the muck, the muck of this being in all of her, you know, soft and hard and mushy and yucky and beautiful and ugly and all of her particularity. So what I love about this depiction is it reminds me of how the tower is all about energy and the liberation of that great energy. And yet, what's misleading, I think, about this depiction is somehow the sense that we ever do really get free of form, that we ever do get free of the particular. We remain embodied, limited, incomplete, transitory, transient beings from birth to death and beyond. And isn't that the message of death? Is that even in death, it's not like particularity ends, it just becomes different. It just moves on. These cards of transformation, these cards of energy and release in the tarot deck, I think we make a mistake if we imagine that they somehow envision a release that takes us beyond the self. Why would we want to go beyond the self? Why would we not just want to find the ways in which the beyond is already right here in this life and heart and body, flawed as it may appear? You know, the image in Buddhism that's so precious that I love is the sort of classic idea that the moon is in a dewdrop, you know, which is a kind of poetic metaphor for how enlightenment works. You know, in a dewdrop, you can see the whole moon. You don't just see a little tiny bit of the moon. The truth in its whole and undiminished luminosity is present in every speck that we encounter, every speck that we are. The Tower reminds us that by reminding us of the atomic energy that is contained in our very being. But if one tower gets destroyed in this conflagration, other towers will be built, and they too will fall. And that's how it works. I think that's how it works. You know, I see that pretty much every day that I'm at the hospital, as I go from one patient's room to the next and go from one moment of sadness to a moment of joy to a moment of meh, you know, to whatever moments. I mean, you know, there's 36 rooms on each of the floors that I cover, and each of those doorways hold another dewdrop, right? That the moon is reflected in. It's all there. Birth and death and mess and muck and beauty and sadness and joy. It's all there. So I revel in this moment of energy, knowing that it doesn't ultimately take me away from self. It just reminds me of the power and energy that the self already is once we encounter it faithfully and fearlessly. Okay. Yeah, Nino Japaritse. That's what I got tonight. As always, thank you. Thank you so much for joining me, and thank you for your practice.